Gavin Newsom walked into the Oval Office expecting a political sparring match with Donald Trump over $43 billion. But he walked out 41 minutes later with his 2028 presidential campaign in absolute ruins. The White House pool camera recorded absolutely everything. It captured 41 minutes, 3 questions Newsom could not answer, 1 number he could not explain, and $24 billion of missing California money. If you believe accountability still matters, this is exactly how the most polished Democrat in America lost his 2028 run in one single Oval Office meeting. The setup, Mr. President, with respect. Before we begin the formal request, I want to be clear about something. Governor Gavin Newsom sat on the Chesterfield chair beside the Oval Office fireplace. He was wearing a Brioni Navy suit and the specific shade of blue tie that his media consultant in Sacramento had selected 3 days earlier. This selection was made after testing 4 alternatives against the warm color temperature of the Oval Office's television lighting. His hair, which had been cut the previous evening by a stylist flown from Los Angeles to his hotel at the Four Seasons Georgetown, was immaculate. 6 feet away, the President of the United States sat behind the resolute desk. It was the desk that Theodore Roosevelt had converted from an antique gift from Queen Victoria. It was the desk at which Franklin Roosevelt had signed the Declaration of War in 1941, and the desk beneath which John Kennedy's son had once hidden during White House photographs. Donald Trump wore a navy suit and a red tie. His hands were folded on top of a single unopened folder. He did not fidget, and he did not tap his fingers. He simply watched Newsom begin. Mr. President, Californians did not vote for you in either election, Newsom stated. The people I represent believe this administration represents an existential threat to democratic norms, to the rule of law, and to the fundamental American project. I say that not to be provocative, but because the people of my state deserve honesty from their governor when he sits across from the President of the United States. Newsom leaned back slightly. It was the kind of lean back a man performs when he believes he has established moral ground before transacting business. He had rehearsed the statement twice in his hotel suite the previous night. His chief of staff, Dana Williamson, who sat now along the wall beside 2 other Newsom aides, had advised him, "Governor, don't let him set the tone. You set it first. Remind him who you represent, then pivot to the ask." Newsom had pivoted, and the ask was next. He expected Trump to respond to the opening statement with an insult, a nickname, or a theatrical interruption. He anticipated some version of the Trump that 7 years of political analysis on MSNBC and the New York Times opinion page had taught him to expect. The narrative was that Trump was dangerous but manageable, that Trump was a prop a governor could frame, counterpunch, and narrate against. Trump did not respond. The silence that followed Newsom's statement was longer than Newsom had anticipated. It was long enough that the pool camera would show a small smile briefly forming at the corner of Susie Wiles's mouth, the chief of staff seated along the wall to Trump's right, before it was strictly controlled. Trump did not offer a diplomatic reciprocation. He did not say, "I appreciate your honesty, Governor." He did not acknowledge the opening at all. He simply waited until Newsom had finished, waited another 4 seconds after that, and then spoke. "Governor, you came here today to ask for $40 billion. It was a statement, not a question. Newsom had actually come to ask for $43 billion, not 40. The exact figure Trump had offered was too close to be coincidental. Someone on Trump's staff had read California's formal request document before the governor even walked into the building. "Yes, Mr. President. For disaster relief related to the January wildfires, I have with me the documentation. I know what you have with you, Governor." Trump did not move to see the documents, nor did he gesture for them. His eyes did not leave Newsom's face. Before we discuss the $40 billion, I want to ask you one question I think the American people would like to hear the answer to. Newsom, who had rehearsed 12 different Trump responses to his opening, had not rehearsed this particular opening. Of course, Mr. President. Trump opened the folder in front of him. He did not remove a document. He simply opened the folder. Governor, where did the $24 billion go? The $24 billion question. The silence that followed the question was not tactical. It was actual. Governor Newsom had come to Washington with a 4-page memorandum of talking points folded into the inside pocket of his jacket. The memorandum had been drafted by a Stanford-trained policy writer and reviewed by 2 former Obama administration officials. It anticipated, by his senior staff's estimation, 94% of the likely questions Trump might ask. The memorandum had not anticipated this question. Mr. President, the $24 billion figure you cite is from your own state auditor, Governor Grant Parks. Your appointee, Trump continued, cutting through the silence. The figure reflects total California state expenditure on homelessness between 2019 and 2024. It is public. You have not disputed it. I am not citing a figure. I am asking you a question about a figure you already know. Trump gestured without looking, and Susie Wiles slid a folder across the low table between the chairs. Newsom picked it up. The folder contained the California State Auditor Report, 2024-12. The California Interagency Council on Homelessness Findings. They were documents from Newsom's own state government. Those are your documents, Governor, not mine, Trump said. Read the first highlighted paragraph. Newsom glanced down. He knew the paragraph. He had known it for 2 years. Mr. President, the 2024 audit found that, read it, Governor, out loud, for the pool camera. A beat passed. Newsom read, the state lacks current information on the ongoing costs and outcomes of homelessness programs. Of the 5 programs evaluated, 3 have inadequate data infrastructure to determine whether the funds spent are producing any measurable result. Trump nodded slowly and pushed another document across. Read the next one. Newsom read again. Between 2019 and 2024, California's homeless population increased from approximately 134,000 to approximately 181,000 by federal HUD count, and to approximately 350,000 by the state's own Continuum of Care Services count. Governor, the $24 billion was spent. The homeless population roughly doubled. Your own state auditor says no one knows where the money went, Trump stated. Is that accurate? Yes or no, Governor? Newsom's hand, which had carried the memorandum in his inside pocket for the preceding 11 minutes, and which had been sweating into the memorandum the entire time, did not reach for it. The memorandum had been written for a Trump who would insult him. The memorandum did not have a paragraph for a Trump asking him to read his own audit aloud. The audit findings are accurate, Newsom conceded. Trump closed the folder in front of him. He did not celebrate the concession. He did not smile, and he did not use a nickname. He simply spoke in the even register of a contractor explaining why an invoice would not be paid. Governor, you flew here today to ask me for $40 billion. I am asking where the last $24 billion went, not for a partisan point, but for a very simple administrative reason. If I sign this disaster declaration, and I am a federal official, I have a fiduciary responsibility to the American taxpayer. I need to know that the state receiving the money can account for it. That's not political. That's basic. Newsom attempted the pivot his staff had rehearsed with him. Mr. President, disaster relief is distinct from homelessness spending. The Stafford Act specifies, Governor, I know what the Stafford Act specifies. Trump interrupted calmly. I signed 31 disaster declarations in my first term. I understand the law. Here's what's not in the law. The law does not require me to ignore the state's track record on prior federal disbursements. And your track record, Governor, is documented in your own audit, by your own auditor, in your own state. The Vasquez resignation Wiles handed Trump a thicker folder. He did not read from it. He slid it directly across the table. Governor, I want to be fair. I want you to see what my administration is seeing, Trump said. These are internal communications from the California Department of Housing and Community Development, obtained through a federal-state data sharing agreement your own administration signed in March of 2023. Newsom opened the folder. The documents were undeniably on state letterhead. Page 12. Governor, read it. Newsom read silently first. His eyes moved across the page twice. Then, after a pause that the pool camera would record as 7 seconds long, he read aloud. Home Key Round 4 allocations. 67% of funds dispersed to projects with no post-occupancy tracking. Verification of outcomes not required under current Memorandum of Understanding. Recommend continuing current disbursement structure to avoid administrative delay. That's your state housing department, Governor. Not my administration, Trump pointed out. They are instructing themselves, in writing, to not track outcomes, because tracking outcomes would delay the disbursement. And the disbursement, apparently, is the point. Mr. President, the Home Key program is the program you called a national model. Newsom interjected. Governor, I have read the press release. I have read the transcript from your press conference in Sacramento, Trump replied. National model, 16,000 units, for 175,000 people. Do the math, Governor. That's 10 people per unit. Are they stacked? It was the first classic Trump moment of the meeting, the first flicker of the rally voice. It was the voice Newsom had prepared for, but it lasted less than 3 seconds. Trump did not pursue it. He let the question sit heavily in the room, and then he moved past it, his voice returning to the even register of a legal deposition. Governor, the question I need answered before I can, in good conscience, put the federal government's full faith and credit behind a $40 billion disbursement to your state is this. Where did the $24 billion go? And how do I know this 40 will not follow the same path? Newsom's hand, which had been carrying the memorandum in his inside pocket for 15 years of California politics, the memorandum was always different, but the hand's relationship to it was the same reach, the same retrieval, the same deployment. That hand moved for a moment toward the pocket and stopped. The memorandum was written for a totally different conversation. It was written for the Trump his advisors had described over the preceding week in prep sessions at the governor's residence in Sacramento. It was prepared for the Trump of insult and narrative frame. It was prepared for the Trump a skilled Democratic governor could lecture from a moral high ground and expect, at worst, an incoherent explosion that would play perfectly on MSNBC that evening. This Trump was not that Trump. This Trump had asked a procedural question, a meticulous budgetary question. It was the kind of question a Republican governor of Texas or a Democratic governor of New York would ask of any colleague requesting $40 billion without accountability for the previous 24. The memorandum in Newsom's pocket did not answer this question because this was not the question Newsom had come prepared to be asked. The hand lowered back to his thigh. The memorandum stayed in his pocket. Trump waited 12 seconds. The Oval Office, which had absorbed worse silences in its history, absorbed this one without comment. Susie Wiles did not write anything down. The pool camera held tight on Newsom's face without cutting away. Governor, I'll ask again. Where did the $24 billion go? Newsom finally found the only answer he had. Mr. President, I will provide my administration's full response in writing. Trump closed the folder in front of him a second time. Governor, that's not an answer. He did not repeat the question a third time. He did not need to. The pool camera had captured the complete non-answer. The White House stenographer, seated discreetly in the alcove beside the grandfather clock, had recorded it. The transcript, which would be declassified through routine FOIA procedure 9 weeks later, would read simply, Governor Newsom declined to provide a verbal response. Trump gestured to Wiles for a new folder. This one was slimmer, containing a single document. Governor, while we are on the subject of accounting, I want to introduce one more item before we move on. This is from your administration's own interagency coordinator on homelessness, a woman named Dr. Elena Vasquez. She served in your Department of Housing and Community Development from June of 2021 through November of 2024. She resigned. Did you know her, Governor? Newsom's face did not change, but his jaw worked once. Dr. Vasquez was a career civil servant. I did not have direct working relationships with Governor. That's fine. I don't need a relationship history. Trump interjected. I need you to hear her testimony. Because she submitted testimony to the Federal Review my administration initiated in February of 2026, under oath. In writing, it is part of the federal record. I am going to read one paragraph. He read, I resigned in November of 2024 because I could no longer maintain professional integrity while working in the California Department of Housing and Community Development. I had, over the preceding 18 months, documented 23 separate instances in which home key disbursements were made without the completion of required verification protocols. When I raised these concerns through internal channels, I was told that verification protocols were subordinate to disbursement velocity. I was told this by my supervisor, who was told it by his supervisor, who was told it by the office of the governor. I have the emails. They are attached as Exhibit A to this declaration. Trump set the document down. Governor, Dr. Vasquez resigned because your office, the office of the governor, not my characterization. Her words instructed her to accelerate disbursements over verification. She has the emails. They are attached as an exhibit to a federal declaration. Do you contest the authenticity of Dr. Vasquez's testimony? Mr. President, I am not familiar with the specific internal communications Dr. Vasquez references. My office handles thousands of personnel, Governor. I did not ask if you were familiar. I asked if you contest the authenticity. Yes or no? Silence. 8 seconds this time. I would need to review the specific documents, Newsom stated. Governor, you have 1 week to review them and contest their authenticity through federal channels, if you choose. Absent contestation, they become part of the federal record in the ongoing Inspector General review of California's use of federal emergency housing funds. Trump paused. Governor, Dr. Vasquez is one of your own people, a career civil servant, not a political appointee, not a Republican, not a person with a partisan motive. She resigned from your administration because, in her sworn words, she could no longer maintain professional integrity while working there. And you, in this room, cannot tell me whether you contest her testimony. Governor, when a career civil servant resigns from your administration because she believes your office is instructing her to violate verification protocols on federal funds, that is not a press management problem. That is a governance problem. And I am being asked today to give your governance $40 billion additional dollars. Newsom's knuckles, resting on the folder in front of him, tightened visibly. The 2004 pledge Trump opened a different folder. These were older documents, The paper had the particular yellowed quality of photocopies pulled from a microfilm archive. The font was smaller. One of the pages Newsom could see from across the table bore the masthead of the San Francisco Chronicle. Governor, I want to go back before the governorship, before California, to 2004, Trump said. You were the mayor of San Francisco. You were 36 years old. You made an announcement. Do you remember it, Mr. President? I am not sure where it was February of 2004, at City Hall in San Francisco, Trump recounted. You stood at a podium, you said, and I have the transcript in front of me. It is on White House letterhead because my staff retyped it from a 10-year-old press archive, quote, homelessness in San Francisco will be eliminated. This is a solvable problem. It requires only political will and sustained investment. I will stake my reputation on it. End quote. Trump slid a document across. It was the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle, dated February 12, 2004. It featured a photograph of a younger Newsom, the hair then, as it was now, perfect, standing at a podium. The headline read, Mayor pledges to end homelessness by 2014. Governor, you staked your reputation on it. Your words, yes, Mr. President, I did, Newsom acknowledged. In 2014, 10 years later, what was the San Francisco homeless population? Governor, I was no longer mayor in 2014. Mr. President, I had been elected lieutenant governor of. That is not what I asked, Governor. What was the population? A pause. Approximately 7,500. And what had the population been in 2004? Governor, when you made the announcement, approximately 6,000. Trump closed the folder. Governor, you promised to eliminate it. 10 years later, it had grown by 25%. That is not a partial success. That is not a qualified failure. That is the exact opposite of what you promised. You staked your reputation on it, Governor. What happened to the reputation? Newsom found his pivot. Mr. President, homelessness is a complex issue that involves interlocking causes. Substance abuse, mental health policy, housing affordability, interstate migration patterns. No single executive in 10 years or 50 has, Governor. It is a yes or no question. Did you accomplish what you staked your reputation on? Silence? No, Mr. President. Trump handed a new folder across the table. It was thinner, containing only 3 pages. Governor, since you invoked complexity, I want to show you something, Trump said. An internal memorandum from your chief of staff during your mayoral term, dated January 16, 2013, 1 year before the 10-year deadline you had publicly committed to. It was provided to my transition team by a former member of your San Francisco administration who has, since 2023, asked to remain anonymous. You may contest its authenticity in writing if you wish. Newsom opened the folder. His eyes moved across the first page. The recognition, when it arrived, was not on his face. It was in the sudden stillness of his hand on the edge of the folder. The hand did not turn the page. Trump read from his own copy, saving Newsom the requirement of reading it aloud. Memorandum to Mayor Newsom via Gubernatorial Campaign Office. Subject: 10-Year Pledge Messaging Strategy. Key paragraph, quote, The 2004 pledge is unrecoverable. Homeless count has grown every measurable year of your mayoralty. Recommend strategic pivot. Stop citing the pledge publicly. Emphasize new programs with different metrics. Redirect media attention to state-level initiatives. If pressed on the 2004 commitment, frame it as aspirational rather than operational. Gubernatorial messaging should not under any circumstances reference the year eliminate timeline. End quote. Trump set the document down. Governor, in January of 2013, your own staff told you the pledge you had staked your reputation on was unrecoverable. They told you to stop citing it, to reframe it as aspirational, to redirect media attention. And you followed that advice. I have reviewed your public statements between January 2013 and your November 2018 gubernatorial election. You did not, for the remainder of that period, reference the 2004 10-year pledge. Not once. He paused. Governor, you knew in 2013 that you had failed. Your staff told you in writing, and instead of telling the public, instead of standing at the same City Hall podium where you had made the pledge and admitting the pledge was not kept, you redirected, you pivoted. You ran for lieutenant governor on a different platform. You ran for governor on a different platform. You ran a California Fair Political Practices Commission, filing in 2017, that emphasized, and I am quoting from your campaign disclosure, your record of innovation in cross-sectoral problem-solving. You did not use the word homelessness, not once in the entire document. Now, you are here, Governor, asking me for $40 billion, and you want me to believe that this time will be different. What has changed, Governor? What has changed in 22 years that would make this $40 billion different from the last $24 billion and different from the 2004 San Francisco pledge before that? Newsom did not answer. The pool camera, which had been holding on him for 90 consecutive seconds by this point, captured a vital detail the wider shot would miss. The knuckles of Newsom's right hand, resting on the folder of the memorandum he had just been made to confront, had turned completely white. It was the only part of his appearance that had changed in 41 minutes. The hair was perfect, the suit was perfect, the posture, to the inexpert eye, remained flawlessly upright. But the knuckles had whitened, and would remain white for the duration of the meeting. Gavin Newsom was 57 years old. He had been a mayor, a lieutenant governor, a governor for nearly 7 years. He had appeared on magazine covers, Time, Vanity Fair, GQ. He had spoken at the Democratic National Convention. He had debated Ron DeSantis on Fox News and, to the horror of his own advisers, but the absolute delight of his base, had not been destroyed. He was considered, in January of 2026, to be among the 3 most plausible Democratic presidential nominees for 2028, and possibly the most plausible. The hair had been, for most of his life, the most consistent and reliable political asset he possessed. The hair was perfect. The hair would remain perfect through the full duration of the Oval Office meeting. The hair would remain perfect for the drive to Reagan National Airport. The hair would remain perfect for the boarding of the California state plane. But the hair, the Oval Office pool camera would later show, was not what he had been betting on. What he had been betting on was performance. He had built a massive career on the ability to shape the narrative in the room, to control the cadence of a conversation, to redirect an unflattering line of questioning into a pivot that served his preferred frame. He had been doing it since 1996, when, as a newly appointed member of the San Francisco Parking and Traffic Commission, he had answered a question at his very first public meeting. A question about parking enforcement, with a 4-minute speech about urban design philosophy. Trump, at the resolute desk, was not allowing the pivot. Trump was not interrupting. Trump was not reacting. Trump was asking a question, allowing the pause, receiving the non-answer, and asking again. The rhythm, Newsom realized somewhere around the 3rd question about San Francisco, was not the rhythm of a political interview. It was the rhythm of a deposition, and the deposition was being conducted in the Oval Office, and the person conducting it was the man Newsom had spent a decade characterizing to California voters and to national Democratic primary audiences as a man incapable of sustained focus. The hair was perfect. The performance it had always rested upon was no longer operating. The fires and the fundraiser. Trump opened a third folder. Governor, I want to talk about the fires. The specific reason you are here in this room today. January through March of 2026. The fires that burned through Pacific Palisades, Altadena, Sylmar, and 23 other zip codes across 4 California counties. The fires that claimed 47 lives. The fires that destroyed 12,400 structures. The fires that produced the disaster request you brought with you today. Yes, Mr. President. Governor, for the pool camera, on what date did you first visit the affected fire zones? Pause. Mr. President, my Chief of Staff can provide the exact. Governor, I am asking you, do you remember the date? A longer pause. I would need to consult January 17th. Governor, Trump supplied. 9 days after the first fire started. 9 days after a state of emergency was declared. 9 days after the first casualties were reported. Trump slid another document across. This is the flight log from a private charter your campaign operation retained from Landmark Aviation. Dates of January 9th through January 16th, 2026. Locations visited: New Hampshire, Iowa, South Carolina. Governor, you were running for President of the United States while Pacific Palisades was burning. I was at the staging area in El Segundo on January 15th. Your Lieutenant Governor was there. Your Attorney General was there, Trump corrected. You were in Manchester, New Hampshire, at a fundraiser held at a private residence owned by Stephanie Tompkins. Newsom's face did not change, but the silence extended. Mr. President, I was conducting official state business. The meetings in New Hampshire included discussions with the Democratic Governors Association about interstate emergency coordination protocols. Governor, I know the difference between state business and a presidential primary fundraiser. I have attended both, Trump stated plainly. The flight log, which is a public record filed with the FAA, documents your travel. The attendance list of the Tompkins event, which was covered by the Manchester Union Leader and the New Hampshire Journal, documents your presence. You were there, Governor, while they were burning. Trump handed over a much thicker folder. Governor, I want to introduce a communication from Cal Fire. It was forwarded to me by the California congressional delegation. Both parties signed the cover letter that accompanied it. The communication is from Chief Robert Morales, Cal Fire Incident Commander, assigned to the Pacific Palisades response, dated January 14th, 2026. 5 days into the fire, Chief Morales sent this email to your Chief of Staff. He slid the document over. Read the highlighted paragraph. Governor, Newsom read, Dana, I am writing because I cannot reach the governor's office through standard channels. We have been in containment operations for 6 days. Our personnel need to see the governor on the scene. The men and women of Cal Fire have been losing colleagues. 44 homes burned on Benvenida yesterday. I would not ordinarily write to you this way, but I have never, in 28 years of service, had a governor absent from the field this long during a severe multi-casualty incident. Please tell me when he is coming. Newsom placed the document down slowly. Governor, a Cal Fire incident commander with 28 years of service, wrote to your Chief of Staff because he could not reach you, because he had never in his career seen a California governor absent this long during a multi-casualty fire, Trump recounted. Your office's response, I have the reply in the folder, dated January 15th, 1 day before your New Hampshire event, was a communication from your Chief of Staff, stating, and I am quoting, The governor is aware of the situation and sends his full support. His schedule does not permit an immediate visit. Governor, his schedule. Trump let the words hang. The men and women of Cal Fire firefighters, Governor, not politicians, firefighters who were running into burning buildings while you were eating dinner in Manchester, were losing colleagues. And the communication from your office said, his schedule. Newsom tried, for the first time in the meeting, a direct counterpunch. It was the moment his advisers had extensively prepared him for. Mr. President, with respect, you were campaigning in 2020 during the global health crisis. You held rallies during active outbreaks. You were not on the ground in every affected state during the pandemic. I understand the political theater of visible absence, but governance requires attention across the entire state, not just symbolic visibility at a single fire. Trump did not interrupt. He allowed the counterpunch to finish. He nodded slowly when Newsom concluded. Governor, in 2020, I was President of the United States during a global pandemic. I was in the White House. I was in briefings. I was not eating dinner at a private fundraiser in New Hampshire while an American city burned, Trump retorted softly. And, Governor, more importantly, I am not the one in this room asking you for $40 billion. You are asking me. The question is not what I did in 2020. The question is what you did in January of 2026. And in January of 2026, Governor, you were not in California. You were running for president while your state was on fire. And now you are in my Oval Office asking the federal government to cover the damage you did not personally witness. Silence filled the room. The pool camera, which had continued to hold steady, captured the single involuntary action of the meeting. Governor Newsom's left hand rose to his jacket cuff. The cuff did not require adjustment. The hand was moving simply because it had to move somewhere, and the cuff was what was available. The hand found the cuff, made a small adjustment that was absolutely unnecessary, and lowered. The motion took less than 1 second. The pool camera captured it perfectly clearly. In the week that followed, that 1-second clip, which would be known in the Internet's compressed vocabulary simply as the cuff, would be viewed 143 million times across social platforms. A behavioral psychology graduate student at UC Berkeley would publish a massive thread analyzing the micro-expression. The thread's most shared sentence read, "This is not nervousness. This is the precise moment a politician realizes that his strategy has ended. The hand moves because the mind does not know where else to put the body." Gavin Newsom did not know, as his hand moved to the cuff, that it was being captured. He did not know that this single, fleeting gesture would be the frame used on the cover of the Sacramento Bee, the Los Angeles Times, and 45 other major American newspapers to illustrate the photograph that accompanied the story of his political end. He knew only that his arm had moved. He knew that Donald Trump had not interrupted. His counterpunch had not been theatrically dismissed. He had not produced a nickname, and he had not hurled a rally insult. Donald Trump had simply waited, listened, acknowledged, and returned the conversation to the question Newsom could not answer. The character question Trump closed the 3 folders he had used and placed them in a neat stack to his left. In front of him now was only a single sheet of paper. He did not slide it across. He looked at Newsom for the first extended look of the meeting. "Governor, we have talked about $24 billion you cannot account for. We have talked about a two-year pledge you did not keep. We have talked about 9 days you were not in your own state while it was burning. I want to ask you about something different now. Not a policy question, not a budget question. A character question." Newsom straightened in his chair for a moment. He saw an opening. Character questions were, in his political self-assessment, his strongest territory. He was considered handsome, He was considered articulate. Profile writers at The New Yorker and The Atlantic had over 15 years used the same adjective to describe him. Thoughtful. He had cultivated a brilliant capacity to speak about his own character on demand in ways that audiences found highly persuasive. Please, Mr. President, Newsom welcomed the shift. November 6, 2020. Do you remember where you were? The opening slammed closed. Every person in the Oval Office knew. Every person watching the pool clip when it aired 3 days later would know. The answer was public. The answer had been public for 6 years. The answer had become, in the political vernacular of both parties, shorthand for a very particular kind of hypocrisy. Mr. President, I have addressed the French Laundry incident multiple times publicly. Newsom deflected. Governor, I did not ask whether you had addressed it. I asked whether you remembered it. Yes, Mr. President, I remember. For the camera, Governor. Where were you? At a dinner. Mr. President. In Yountville, California. At a restaurant? Yes. What was the name of the restaurant? Governor? The French Laundry. How many people were at your table? Approximately 12, Mr. President. Approximately 12, Trump echoed. And at that time, Governor, what had you, 2 days earlier, instructed Californians to do regarding Thanksgiving gatherings? Pause. I had issued guidance encouraging Californians to limit gatherings to members of their own household, Newsom stated carefully. Limit, Governor? Trump challenged. I have your exact language in front of me. Your press office statement, November 4, 2020, quote, gatherings with individuals outside your immediate household should not occur. This is not a suggestion. This is guidance grounded in public health imperatives. Californians who violate this guidance are putting the safety of their neighbors at risk. End quote. Trump placed the paper down. Governor, 2 days after issuing that statement, which called gatherings not a suggestion and accused Californians who violated it of putting lives at risk, you attended a dinner for 12 at a Michelin 3-starred restaurant with lobbyists, Trump summarized. The photograph of the table was taken by another diner and published. I have the photograph. He did not show the photograph. He did not need to. Every American over the age of 35 had seen it. Governor, you told California families they could not gather with their own parents for Thanksgiving, and 2 days later you dined with lobbyists. Mr. President, I have apologized for that incident multiple times, Newsom stressed. Governor, I did not ask for an apology. I asked a question, Trump clarified. The question is this. When you told Californians that gathering with their own families was putting lives at risk, did you believe it? Newsom paused. Mr. President, the public health guidance at the time reflected the best available scientific understanding of Governor. Did you believe it? Trump demanded softly. The words you said when you said them. Did you, Gavin Newsom, believe that a California family gathering for Thanksgiving was putting lives at risk? A long silence followed. I believe the guidance was necessary, Mr. President. That is not what I asked, Governor. Did you believe the words you said? The silence that followed was exactly 14 seconds long. The pool camera audio engineer in the control booth in the lower level of the West Wing watched the silence meter climb steadily. He did not cut away. He did not cover the awkward pause with a studio transition. He let it run. It was, he would tell his wife that night over dinner at their apartment in Arlington. The most effective silence he had permitted to run in 17 years of pool production work. The guidance reflected Newsom tried again. Governor, you cannot answer the question. Trump leaned back slightly in the chair behind the resolute desk. Governor, I am going to tell you why this matters. Not for my personal satisfaction. Not for political points, Trump explained. Because I am about to decide whether to sign a $40 billion federal disaster declaration. And in order to make that decision, I have to assess whether the words you are telling me today, in this room, about accountability and outcomes, and the need for federal-state partnership. I have to assess whether you believe the words you are saying, or whether, like the words you said to Californians about Thanksgiving in 2020, they are simply what you need to say to get what you want. Governor, I cannot sign a $40 billion declaration based on words from a man who cannot, in this Oval Office, answer the question of whether he believed his own guidance to his own constituents during a public health emergency. Trump waited 18 seconds. It was longer than any silence in the meeting so far. He was not pressing. He was simply giving Newsom the full opportunity to respond before moving on. The 18 seconds the pool camera would show were the absolute clearest summary of the meeting's dynamic. Trump did not need to fill space. Trump could wait. The waiting was its own instrument. Finally, Trump added one more thing quietly. Governor, I want to add one sentence, because it matters, for the decision I am about to make. In November of 2020, while you were at dinner at the French Laundry with lobbyists, a grandmother in Bakersfield named Rosalinda Mendoza did not attend her grandson's 8th birthday party. Her daughter had asked her not to come. Her daughter had cited your guidance. Rosalinda Mendoza passed away from a severe heart condition on Christmas Eve of that year. She had not seen her grandson since August. Governor, I did not know Rosalinda Mendoza. I am not using her for a political point, Trump stated softly. I am telling you her name because her daughter wrote to my White House Correspondence Office in December of 2024, shortly after I was elected. The letter is on file. The daughter wrote the letter because she had seen, for the 4th time that year, the photograph of your table at the French Laundry reposted on social media. The daughter asked one question in her letter. I will read it to you, Trump said. He picked up the paper. He read, Mr. President-elect, I am writing to ask you something I cannot ask Governor Newsom because his office will not respond to my letters. My mother passed away believing she was protecting my son. She believed this because Governor Newsom told her to believe this. 2 days after Governor Newsom told her to believe this, he went to dinner with 12 people at a restaurant. I have spent 4 years trying to understand how to explain this to my son. He is 12 now. He still asks about his grandmother. What do I tell him? Trump placed the letter face down. Governor, I do not have an answer for her. I am not going to invent one, but I am telling you her story because, in about 10 minutes, I am going to make a decision about $40 billion. And the decision will be informed in part by my assessment of the character of the man requesting it. The character question is not an abstraction, Governor. It has names. Rosalinda Mendoza is one of them. Newsom's eyes moved, for the first time in the entire meeting, down to the floor. He did not look up for 7 seconds. When he finally looked up, he said only, I am sorry for her family's loss, Mr. President. I know you are, Governor. That is part of the problem, Trump replied immediately. Mr. President, you are sorry for her family's loss. And you were sorry when it was politically damaging in 2020. And you will be sorry at the next funeral in California that I will hear about from a grieving relative who will write to this office because yours will not respond. You are, Governor, genuinely and repeatedly sorry. What you are not is accountable, and those are not the same thing. The ultimatum Trump closed all the folders. The resolute desk was empty now, except for his hands and the single sheet of paper he had not slid across during round 4. He looked at Newsom for a full 10 seconds before speaking. The pool camera held on the historic tableau. President at desk, Governor in the Chesterfield chair, the gold curtains in soft focus behind them, the Oval Office at its particular March afternoon stillness. Governor, I want to be clear about what is going to happen. so that there is no ambiguity, and so that your staff, when you brief them in the car on the way to the airport, has an accurate record of this conversation." Newsom nodded tightly. "I am going to sign a federal disaster declaration for California, not the one you requested, a different one. The amount will be $12 billion, not 43. Newsom's face showed, for the first time in the 4-1-minute meeting, a visible reaction. It lasted less than half a second. 12 billion, approximately 28 cents on every single requested dollar. The 12 billion will be structured as follows. Trump dictated. 6 billion will be direct aid to the affected California counties, bypassing state administration entirely. I want this money to reach the people whose homes burned, not your home key successor agencies, not your continuum of care contractors, not your State Department of Housing Administration, county governments, which I trust to be closer to the ground than your administration has been for the last 3 years. 3 billion will be allocated to FEMA for direct administration under federal supervision, federal comptroller oversight of every single disbursement, quarterly reports to Congress, fraud prosecution by the Department of Justice, if any is found. 3 billion will be conditional, released only upon completion by your administration of a full public accounting of the prior 24 billion in homelessness spending. The accounting must be audited by a federal inspector general's office, not a state auditor. If the accounting is not completed within 12 months, the 3 billion returns to the general federal treasury. Trump paused. Governor, you came here today to ask for $43 billion without accountability. I am offering you $12 billion with accountability. If you accept, sign here. He slid a single document across the table. It was the executive order, pre-drafted, the White House seal. It had a signature line for Newsom to countersign as the receiving state's executive, and a signature line for Trump immediately below. If you refuse, Governor, I will issue a federal emergency supplemental through existing FEMA statutory authority at approximately $4 billion, with no state consultation. That option does not require your signature. Governor, your choice. Newsom looked down at the document. He had been in the Oval Office for exactly 41 minutes. He had answered 3 of the questions he had been asked, with direct evasions. He had answered 4 more with extended, painful silences. He had not managed, at any point in the conversation, to redirect the discussion to the territory he had prepared. He picked up the pen. He read the executive order text. His eyes moved across the rigorous conditions. The accounting requirement, the county direct disbursement, the federal inspector general oversight. Then, without looking up, he signed. Trump took the document, signed his own name on the line immediately below Newsom's, and handed the document to Susie Wiles, who filed it in an archival folder and placed the folder on a small side table. Governor, California will receive $12 billion in federal disaster assistance. The accounting requirement on the final $3 billion is in effect as of today. My chief of staff will be in communication with yours regarding the specific federal audit protocols. Trump stood. It was the first time he had stood during the entire meeting. Governor, I hope your administration finds where the $24 billion went, for your sake, and for the sake of the people of California. He did not extend a hand. He walked to the private door on the east side of the Oval Office, the door that led to the corridor connecting to his private dining room and the Chief of Staff's office. He did not look back. He did not wait for Newsom to leave first. The door closed behind him. Susie Wiles held open the Oval Office door on the opposite side, the exact door through which Newsom had entered 43 minutes earlier. Governor, your motorcade is ready. Newsom stood. He did not speak. He walked out. The pool camera captured the final, lingering frame of the meeting. The resolute desk, empty. The folders, stacked and gone. The Oval Office, completely still. The fallout. The pool camera footage from the Oval Office meeting was released by the White House Correspondents Association per standard protocol, 48 hours after the meeting concluded. The released package was a 10-minute edited selection, chosen by the pool producer on rotation. It did not include the full 3 hours of ambient footage that the camera had captured. It included, specifically, the moment Newsom's hand rose to his jacket cuff during round 3. It included the 1-4-second silence before Newsom could not answer the French Laundry question during round 4. It included the final frame of the empty Oval Office. Within 72 hours, the full 10-minute clip had been viewed 91 million times across platforms. The hashtag number 24billion trended for 118 consecutive hours, becoming the longest political trending event on X since 2022. The pattern was incredibly consistent across user posts. A photograph of a homeless encampment in a California city, typically Sacramento, Los Angeles, or San Francisco, accompanied by a screenshot of Newsom's public 2023 announcement, framing HomeKey as a national model. A waitress in Sacramento named Deborah Alvarez posted a photograph of her monthly rent receipt alongside Newsom's $24 billion figure, with the caption, "It is the math that does not work." The post collected 3.4 million likes in 48 hours. Alvarez was contacted by a Newsom staff member for comment. She did not respond. She was, 3 weeks later, offered a book deal by Simon & Schuster. She declined. She continued to work at the diner on Fulton Avenue, where she had worked for 11 years. The cuff, the 0.7-second moment the pool camera had captured during Trump's question about Cal Fire Chief Morales became the most widely shared political reaction template in TikTok history. Users applied the clip to personal moments of realization that they had been caught. The clip accumulated 143 million views in 90 days. A behavioral psychology graduate student at UC Berkeley published a viral thread analyzing the micro-expression. Her most shared sentence: "This is not nervousness. This is the precise moment a politician realizes that his strategy has ended." Newsom's Wikipedia page gained a brand new subsection under controversies titled Oval Office Meeting, March 2026. Within 1 week, the subsection was significantly longer than the French Laundry subsection. Wikipedia editors did not revert it. The citations were simply too dense and too mainstream. The California State Auditor's Office, pursuant to the rigid federal accounting requirement attached to the $12 billion disaster declaration, opened the most comprehensive audit of state homelessness spending in California history. The audit scope covered fiscal years 2019 through 2026. The first findings, released 4 months into the audit process, identified $3.1 billion in state expenditure for which absolutely no disbursement records existed. The finding was reported on page A, one of the Sacramento Bee, under the scathing headline, "Where the money went, nobody knows." The California State Legislature, responding aggressively to the audit findings, passed Assembly Bill 293. The homelessness transparency legislation Newsom had previously vetoed in September of 2024, with massive veto-proof majorities in both the Assembly and the Senate. Newsom signed it without ceremony. No press release was issued. No reporters were invited. The United States Department of Housing and Urban Development Office of Inspector General opened a sweeping federal compliance review of California's use of federal emergency housing voucher funds between fiscal years 2021 and 2026. The review was not criminal. It was, however, the first federal-level inquiry into California homelessness spending in 22 years. The Los Angeles Times, in collaboration with the investigative nonprofit Cal Matters, published an exhaustive 4-part investigative series over the following 18 months, titled The Missing Billions. The series won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service the year after publication concluded. Newsom declined every single interview request during the reporting period. His former San Francisco chief of staff, whose 2013 memorandum had been read into the Oval Office record in March of 2026, did agree to one on-the-record interview. The final paragraph of that interview, which ran on the series' last day, would become the most famously quoted sentence of the entire Pulitzer-winning investigation. He always believed the sentence when he said it. He believed it. That was his gift and his problem. He was the last person in the room to know a promise had become a lie. California Republican state legislators introduced legislation months after the Oval Office meeting to require mandatory quarterly gubernatorial presence at sites of active state emergencies. The legislation was named the Cal Fire Presence Act, in direct reference to Chief Morales's January 2026 email. It did not pass, but it was introduced, and it was, for the very first time in modern California political memory, the subject of serious bipartisan discussion. The end of the campaign. Gavin Newsom officially announced his 2028 presidential campaign on April 14, 2027. 13 months after the Oval Office meeting, the announcement event was held at the San Francisco Ferry Building. The crowd was noticeably smaller than his 2018 gubernatorial kickoff had been. His announcement speech was 61 minutes long. It did not mention homelessness. It did not mention California's federal audit. It did not mention the Oval Office meeting. Democratic primary polling conducted by 5 major outlets in the 2 weeks following the announcement placed Newsom an abysmal 4th in a 9-candidate Democratic primary field. He had been considered, 18 months earlier, the presumptive frontrunner for the nomination. The polling narrative across all 5 outlets converged on a single devastating phrase, repeated in varying forms by focus group participants across every demographic category. He did not have an answer. The Democratic National Committee, in quiet, strategic conversations that leaked to Axios by October of 2027, concluded that Newsom had become structurally unviable for a general election. The word structurally was the word that circulated endlessly through Democratic campaign strategist circles for months afterward. It meant, in plain English, that absolutely no amount of additional media strategy could repair what the Oval Office pool camera had captured. Newsom withdrew from the Democratic primary on February 4, 2028, just 4 days before the critical New Hampshire primary. His withdrawal statement was 2,100 words long. It did not mention the Oval Office meeting. It did mention, 3 separate times, a phrase that would follow him for the remainder of his political career: the need to refocus on the state that elected me. California inaugurated a new governor in January of 2028. The new governor, a Democrat, inherited the massive federal audit process. By the middle of 2029, her administration had released a 340-page comprehensive accounting of the $24 billion. 14 criminal referrals emerged from the detailed accounting. 2 former Newsom administration officials were indicted on federal wire fraud charges. Both pleaded guilty within 9 months of their indictment. Newsom himself was not charged. No evidence emerged linking him personally to the fraudulent disbursements. His offense, as the Sacramento Bee would write in a scathing editorial titled "The Administrative Failure," was administrative rather than criminal. He did not steal the money, the editorial concluded. He simply could not tell anyone where it went. And in the end, that was worse. 4 years after the Oval Office meeting, A former senior staff member who had served in both Newsom's San Francisco mayoralty and his California governorship was asked by a reporter from Politico magazine, strictly off the record, what she thought had really happened in Washington on that March morning in 2026. She thought about the question for a very long time. Then she said, "He walked in thinking it was a press conference. He walked out realizing it had been a deposition." The pool camera footage, which had been released to the American public that week in March of 2026, remained securely in the National Archives. It would be studied extensively in the decade that followed by political science graduate students, by White House communications staff of both political parties, and by speechwriters preparing heads of state for monumental meetings they could not afford to lose. It would be studied because it had demonstrated a simple, brutal truth that had been forgotten in the decade preceding it. The truth was that performance only works when the other party agrees to perform. Donald Trump, that March morning in the Oval Office, had not agreed, and the hair, for all its meticulous, careful grooming, had not been the instrument the governor had needed.